How dare you bring this disgrace into our home, Emma? My father's voice thundered through the kitchen, reverberating off the walls like a crack of thunder. He stood rigid at the head of the table, his face contorted in fury and disappointment. Leaning against the counter with her arms crossed, Eliza watched in silence, her lips pressed into a tight, unreadable line. She didn't speak, didn't flinch. Just observed, as if this wasn't her family crumbling in front of her. I sat frozen, my pulse thudding in my ears, shame and disbelief pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. My name is Emma Morgan. I'm 26. And tonight, everything in my world feels like it's unraveling. My father, the only parent I have left, was staring at me like I was a stranger. Eliza, my twin, my supposed equal, didn't lift a finger to defend me. And here I was, accused of a crime I didn't commit, realizing that no one was standing in my corner. It all started when the court notices began arriving at my dad's doorstep, one after another, more alarming with each delivery. They claimed I had defaulted on several loans I'd supposedly taken out. At first, I thought it was just spam or a scam, random calls about debts I didn't recognize. But this was real. Legal threats. Bank statements. Paper trails with my name on them. And just like that, the ground shifted beneath me. It wasn't me, Dad, I said, my voice trembling but firm. I don't know how this happened, but I didn't do it. Eliza finally stirred. She shifted her weight, eyes gleaming just slightly before she spoke. Seriously, Emma? Your name's on the documents. The loans, the signatures, it's all you. Just admit it. Stop pretending you're the victim. Her tone was calm, but sharp, like a knife cloaked in silk. My father's eyes bore into mine. So this is just a misunderstanding, he said, voice low and full of disbelief. Strangers just randomly decided to pin all of this on you? Why would they go through the trouble? I swallowed hard. My throat was dry, but I held my ground. Because someone used my name. I don't know how, but I swear I didn't take out those loans. I wouldn't lie to you. I glanced at Eliza. Her expression didn't soften. She only raised her hands in mock innocence. Framed? Really, she said, her words soaked in sarcasm. Why would anyone go to those lengths just to mess with you? No offense, Emma, but that doesn't exactly sound believable. Dad shook his head and started pacing, anger simmering just beneath the surface. I've given you the benefit of the doubt for years. But this? This is too much. You're an adult. And it's time you faced the consequences. Until then, you're not welcome here. The room seemed to tilt. You're kicking me out? I asked quietly, stunned. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. Eliza let out a long sigh and shook her head, dripping with fake sympathy. I hate that it's come to this, but maybe some distance will help you figure things out, Emma. I turned to her, anger coiling in my chest like a spring ready to snap. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I said, my voice low, taut. You've always been the golden child. And now you get to watch me fall apart while everyone thinks you're perfect. She didn't deny it. She didn't even blink. And in that moment, I knew, this wasn't just bad luck. This wasn't random. This was personal. Eliza isn't the problem here, Emma, Dad snapped, his voice like ice. You are. Don't make this any harder. Pack your things and leave tonight. The finality in his voice hit like a blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. I turned away without a word, my eyes burning as I fought back tears. It didn't matter what I said, he wouldn't hear it. He wouldn't believe it. I packed in silence, my hands moving on autopilot. Every shirt I folded, every book I tucked into the bottom of my bag, felt like a goodbye to a life I thought was mine. The walls of my childhood room seemed distant now, like they belonged to someone else entirely, some girl who still had a home and a family. Eliza stood in the doorway, arms crossed loosely, a faint look of pity on her face. I wish it didn't have to come to this, she said, voice soft but strangely flat. There was sympathy there, but it felt rehearsed, calculated. I didn't turn around. Just kept folding clothes and shoving them into my duffel. Yeah, I muttered. So do I. It's just, things look really bad right now, she added. Maybe some time away will give you space to figure out what really happened. My hands froze on the dresser drawer, fingers curling over the edge. I didn't do this, I said quietly. I don't know how it happened, but I didn't. She gave a gentle sigh, stepping back into the hall. I hope you figure it out, Emma. For your sake. Her words clung to me, even as I zipped up the duffel and slung it over my shoulder. Something about all of it felt off, wrong in a way I couldn't quite name. But there was no room to argue. Not anymore. Outside, the night air bit through my jacket, crisp and cutting. The house behind me loomed large, no longer a home but a monument to betrayal. I stood at the end of the driveway and looked back at the dim light still glowing in the upstairs window. Dad hadn't even come to say goodbye. He'd cast me out without a backward glance. Eliza's voice replayed in my mind. I hope you figure it out for your sake. She sounded like she already knew something, like she was 2 steps ahead. But why? And why was everyone so quick to turn on me when I hadn't done anything wrong? As I walked down the quiet street, bag slung across one shoulder, I made myself a promise: I wasn't going to let this be the end. I might not have answers now, but I would get them. No matter what it took. The bus station was almost deserted when I got there, the harsh fluorescent lights casting eerie shadows along the tiled floor. I approached the counter, sliding crumpled bills across as my hand trembled. The clerk didn't ask questions. Just handed me a one-way ticket to the nearest city with a bored nod. I took it and found a seat in the far corner, curling into the shadows like I wanted to disappear. As I sat there, staring at the flimsy ticket in my palm, the weight of everything started to settle in. No home. No family. No clear path. I was completely on my own. How had everything unraveled so fast? Who would go to such lengths to twist the truth, and why? A low rumble filled the air as a bus approached, headlights slicing through the dark outside. I stood slowly, my grip tightening around my bag. This wasn't the road I'd imagined for myself, but it was mine now. And I'd walk it, step by step, until I found the truth. The first few days after I left home blurred together in a haze of dingy motel rooms, cheap instant noodles, and sleepless nights spent staring at cracked ceilings. I was barely hanging on, haunted by everything I'd lost and the life that had unraveled in the blink of an eye. But as tempting as it was to stay buried beneath the covers and let the world pass me by, I knew that wasn't going to save me. I needed to survive. And that meant getting to work, any kind of work. I ended up landing a job at a small clothing store downtown. It wasn't glamorous, and the hours were long, but it gave me a place to be and a paycheck to scrape by. My coworker Mia was sharp-tongued and unapologetically blunt, with fire-red hair and a dry wit that made the day go faster. She didn't ask too many questions, but somehow, she had a way of making you talk without meaning to. One quiet afternoon, as we folded sweaters behind the counter, I found myself telling her everything. Maybe it was the lull in customer traffic, or maybe I just needed to finally say it out loud. It's been a total nightmare, I admitted, folding and refolding the same cardigan. I don't even know how I got wrapped up in it. Fraud, loan applications in my name. I've never done anything like that in my life. Mia stopped folding and leaned against the edge of the counter, arms crossed. Sounds awful, she said, her brows pulling together. But if it wasn't you, you ever think maybe someone pretended to be you? I paused, caught off guard. Pretended to be me? She nodded. Yeah. You said it was identity theft, right? Someone could have used your name, your info. Or maybe even, your face. That last part made something shift in my stomach. I hadn't considered that before, not really. I mean, maybe. But who'd go to those lengths? She tilted her head, considering me. Anyone who looks enough like you to pull it off? Her question hung heavy in the air. I didn't respond right away. But then my mind went to the one person it could be. My twin, I said finally, almost in a whisper. Eliza. We're identical. But she would never do something like that. Everyone loves her. Mia raised an eyebrow. You're telling me there's someone walking around who could pass as you? And you're sure she's not involved? She's always been the golden girl, I said, shaking my head. My dad trusts her with everything. Everyone does. She'd never risk all that. Besides, why would she want to frame me? Mia gave a short, humorless laugh. Why does anyone do anything? Jealousy, resentment, attention. Maybe she thought she could get away with it, and with your face? She probably could. I didn't want to hear it, but I couldn't unhear it either. As much as I tried to brush it off, her words stuck with me. The thought made me queasy, but the more I turned it over in my head, the less impossible it started to seem. That night, I lay awake in my tiny apartment, the ceiling above me cracked and yellowed with time. Mia's voice echoed in my head like a whisper I couldn't shake. Who better to impersonate you than someone who looks just like you? Eliza had always been the star. The charming one. The one who could twist any story and come out looking like the hero. And me? I was the quiet one. The afterthought. The scapegoat. But could she really do something so ruthless? Could the person I trusted most be the one who'd betrayed me? I pulled out my phone and began scrolling through old photos. There we were, Eliza and me, side by side, nearly indistinguishable. Mirror images. I remembered how she used to joke about how easy it would be to switch places and trick people. Back then, it had seemed harmless, just her being playful. But now, those jokes felt like veiled warnings, clues I hadn't recognized for what they were. As much as I wanted to believe otherwise, a part of me couldn't ignore the growing suspicion. If Eliza had done this, if she had used my identity and set me up, then she had gone to great lengths to ensure I took the fall. And if that were true, I couldn't afford to confront her or anyone else until I had proof. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore, it was about finding the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next morning, I made a choice. No phone calls to Dad. No messages to Eliza. If there was even a chance Mia was right, confronting them now would only backfire. First, I needed answers. At work, I pulled Mia aside and told her I was ready to dig into it. I wasn't sure what to expect, maybe skepticism, maybe concern, but instead, she lit up with excitement. Finally, she said, clapping her hands together. I was wondering when you'd decide to fight back. Count me in. You don't have to get involved, I said cautiously, nervously twisting a clothes hanger between my fingers. Mia waved me off. Oh, please. You think I'm going to sit this one out? I live for a good mystery. And besides, two brains are better than one. So where do we start? Do you have any documents or clues we can dig into? I nodded and reached into my bag, pulling out a folder I'd been carrying with me like a weight. Inside were the copies of the court notices that had been sent to my dad's house. Mia took the stack and immediately got to work, her expression sharpening with focus. Okay, she muttered, flipping through the pages. Most of these are tied to loan accounts and financial institutions. We need to see where they were opened. Maybe there's a pattern, something that can lead us back to whoever set this up. For the first time in what felt like forever, a small spark of hope flickered in my chest. Mia's energy was contagious, and her determination gave me the strength I hadn't been able to find on my own. Together, we started piecing things together. If Eliza, or anyone else, was behind this, we were going to find out. The next few days were a whirlwind. On lunch breaks, after work, and late into the night at Mia's cramped kitchen table, we sorted through paperwork and tried to map the accounts. She had an eye for detail I didn't, spotting inconsistencies I had overlooked, small things like subtle differences in handwriting, or the opening dates that didn't match up with my schedule. Here, look at this, she said one afternoon, sliding a document across to me. This signature? It's close to yours, but not quite right. And every single one of these accounts? They were opened in the city next door. Not here. I stared at the paper, something shifting inside me. We were onto something. I stared at the paper in front of me, my pulse thudding in my ears. Eliza had been in that city a couple of years ago. She told everyone it was for some volunteer program. But now. I hesitated, the words catching on my tongue. Do you think? Mia leaned back slowly in her chair, her expression tightening. It's starting to look like someone used her identity while they were there. And if she was the one spending time in that city, she trailed off, letting the weight of the implication settle between us. I swallowed hard. I don't want to jump to conclusions. But everything's beginning to point in one direction, toward her. Mia nodded once. We're not there yet. But if she's behind this, there'll be more. We need to follow the trail, transactions, records, anything connected to these accounts. Her quiet confidence gave me the courage I needed. I wasn't ready to accuse Eliza, not without proof. But the puzzle pieces were starting to snap into place. The first stop on our list was a small credit union on the outskirts of town. When Mia and I stepped inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and old paper. A young woman behind the counter looked up and smiled. "Welcome back," she said brightly. I blinked. "I'm sorry?" Her smile faltered, then returned, a little sheepish. "Oh, my mistake. I could have sworn you'd been in before. You just look really familiar." Mia shot me a look but stayed quiet. I walked up to the counter, heart thudding. "Actually, I'm here because a loan was opened under my name, and I'm trying to figure out what happened." The woman nodded and began typing. As she scanned the screen, her smile slipped into a slight frown. "Yes, I see the account here. Opened 2 years ago," she said. "All the documentation was submitted in person, so we'll just need to verify a few things." "In person?" I repeated, my voice suddenly tight. She looked at me, then back at the monitor. "Yes, the applicant came into the branch with ID and signed all the paperwork here. I remember, actually, it was an unusually warm day, and we chatted about it. That's probably why your face stuck in my mind." Mia leaned an elbow on the counter, casual but attentive. "Would it be possible for us to see a copy of the documents? Just to verify everything?" The woman hesitated. "I can't print anything or give you copies, but I can pull up the scanned forms on screen." She turned the monitor slightly toward us. There it was, my name. My signature. My photo. But it wasn't me. I leaned closer, my heart racing. The face staring back was almost mine, same bone structure, same eyes, but the mouth curved differently. The tilt of the chin was just a little off. Mia leaned in too, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's your sister, isn't it?" My stomach dropped. I couldn't deny it. The woman on the screen was Eliza. And the truth I'd been avoiding was now staring me straight in the face. We visited 2 more places that afternoon, each more unsettling than the last. Every time we stepped through the door of a bank or loan office, it was the same story, recognition I didn't deserve. Smiles from strangers who greeted me like an old friend. Comments about meetings I'd never attended. At one location, a middle-aged man behind the desk gave a knowing chuckle as he sifted through a stack of papers. "Back again? Didn't think we'd be seeing you so soon," he said with an easy grin. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. My stomach twisted. "Actually, I'm here about a discrepancy with an account opened in my name." The man paused, his expression dimming as he looked up. "There's an issue? But you were just here last month. You brought in all the documents yourself." Mia stepped in, calm and composed. "Do you happen to have a copy of the ID that was used? Maybe something still on file?" He nodded, though his brow furrowed. "Yeah, just a second." He clicked through a few screens, then turned the monitor slightly in our direction. I stopped breathing. There, on the screen, was a photo ID. My name. My birthday. My address. But the face? It was Eliza. Wearing my identity like a costume. My twin. My own sister. Her smile in the photo was so confident, so at ease, like she had no doubt she'd get away with it. My stomach dropped. I felt the room tilt slightly as realization washed over me, cold and paralyzing. It had been her all along. The loans, the fraud, the mess I'd been drowning in for months. She had done it. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding against my ribs. The betrayal was sharp, immediate, like someone had ripped the floor out from under me. She's been setting you up from the beginning, Mia said softly, her hand steady on my shoulder, grounding me. Her voice was low but laced with fury. I couldn't speak. I couldn't cry. I couldn't even move. I just sat there, hollow and stunned, trying to absorb the sheer magnitude of what Eliza had done to me. My sister had ruined my life. And my father, he had believed her without a second thought. When we left the office, I was silent. My mind raced, connecting dots I'd ignored, excused, or brushed aside. The high-end handbags. The new jewelry she wore to family dinners. The luxury coats and shoes she claimed were little treats. I'd asked her once how she could afford it all. She had laughed. Oh, just been saving up. You know how it is. And I'd believed her. Why wouldn't I? Eliza always had a way of making things sound easy. Effortless. But now I saw it differently, the vagueness, the deflections, the smugness in her eyes when I pressed for details. She hadn't been saving. She'd been stealing, from me. The next day, I sat across from David Cole, a lawyer recommended by Mia's cousin. He was calm, focused, and professional, with kind eyes and the demeanor of someone who didn't scare easily. His office smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, and the organized chaos of legal files surrounded us. I've been notified I defaulted on several loans, I told him, doing my best to keep my voice steady. I didn't apply for them, but I need to understand what happens if I don't pay, or if I do. David nodded, lacing his fingers together. If you pay the loans, that can stop legal actions, like wage garnishments or lawsuits, but unfortunately, it won't erase the fact that the loans were defaulted in the first place. That damage stays on your credit report unless the lenders agree to remove it, which isn't common. I swallowed hard, the knot in my stomach growing tighter. And if I don't pay? He leaned forward slightly, his tone measured. Then you're at risk of being sued. Creditors can pursue garnishment of wages, bank levies, and more. But if you can prove identity theft, that changes things. The key is building a case with evidence. I have a copy of the ID used. It's her face. My name. David's eyes narrowed, and he nodded. That's a start. But you'll need more, witness statements, timestamps, anything that can prove you weren't the one who submitted those applications. This could take time, but it's not impossible. For the first time in weeks, I felt the smallest flicker of hope. Eliza had stolen my name, my future, and nearly shattered my life, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not anymore. I gave a slow nod, trying to absorb everything. And if I don't pay? David's expression grew more serious. That's when things can escalate. The lenders could take legal action, file lawsuits to recover the money. If they win, they can pursue judgments against you, which might include wage garnishment or asset seizure. It would also seriously impact your credit and your ability to borrow money down the line. His words were clear, but they landed like bricks in my stomach. So if I paid them, even if it wasn't my fault, would that at least help fix my record? David tilted his head slightly, weighing the answer. It might demonstrate that you're trying to make things right, which could help in certain contexts. But if your name was used fraudulently, paying the debts won't clear your name, it just stops the collection efforts. You'd still need to deal with the root cause if you want a clean slate. I nodded again, heart pounding. I wasn't ready to mention Eliza. Not yet. I needed to understand the full picture before I dragged her into it. I hesitated, then asked, hypothetically, what if someone stole my identity and used it to take out those loans? What then? David leaned in slightly, his gaze sharpening. If that's the case, then you're looking at identity theft. It's a serious situation. You wouldn't be legally responsible for the debts, but you'd need to prove it. That usually involves filing a police report, notifying each lender, and disputing the fraudulent accounts with the credit bureaus. A knot tightened in my chest. What if I can't prove it wasn't me? I asked, my voice small. Then it becomes more difficult, he said carefully. The burden of proof falls on you. Without evidence, they'll continue to treat you as the account holder. But anything you can gather, an alibi, inconsistencies in signatures, applications opened in locations you weren't in, could help build your case. The weight of it all settled heavily on my shoulders. So even if I paid the loans, unless I prove I didn't open them, the blame still sticks? Exactly, David confirmed. Paying them might stop legal action, but it doesn't erase the assumption that you opened those accounts. If someone else is behind this, and if there's even a chance it's fraud, you need to act now. The longer you wait, the harder it'll be to uncover the truth. I nodded slowly, thoughts spinning. His logic was sound. And it made something crystal clear, I couldn't keep running from this. Seeing the look on my face, David's tone softened slightly. If you can prove someone else opened those loans using your identity, not only will you be cleared of responsibility, but the creditors will have to close those accounts and stop pursuing you. Your credit record can be corrected too, those negative marks can be removed. Relief flickered, but it was short-lived. A new thought crept in. And what happens to the person who stole my identity? I asked. David's expression didn't change. If you identify them and press charges, they could face criminal penalties, fraud, identity theft, potentially jail time depending on the amount involved. But first, you need to focus on protecting yourself and gathering the evidence. One step at a time. One step at a time. I nodded again, steeling myself. It was time to stop avoiding the truth, and start digging into it. That depends, David said, his tone steady but unyielding. If you present evidence of identity theft, it shifts into a criminal investigation. Law enforcement could get involved, and whoever's behind this could face charges, fraud, forgery, potentially even prison time depending on how far it goes. There's also restitution, fines, serious consequences. I felt a lump rise in my throat. So, if I come forward with proof, I can clear my name, but the person responsible might end up in court, or worse? He nodded, his gaze firm. Yes. But remember, your priority is protecting yourself. If someone close to you did this, I understand how complicated that feels. But this isn't just about finances, it's about justice. And making sure it doesn't happen again. His words hit hard. I sat there, absorbing the weight of it. I could finally clear my name. But to do that, I'd have to turn Eliza in. My own sister. The thought of sending her to jail made my stomach twist. But I also knew I couldn't keep living like this, under suspicion, under shame, paying the price for someone else's betrayal. That's when a different kind of plan began to take shape. One that would give me closure without burning everything to the ground. The family reunion. It was coming up in just a week. Everyone would be there, mom, dad, cousins, aunts, uncles. It would be the perfect moment. Not to humiliate Eliza, but to make her see what she'd done. To show the truth, lay it out clearly, publicly. I would give her a choice, fix this, or I would take it further. She would pay back the loans. She would take responsibility. But if she agreed to make it right, I wouldn't involve the authorities. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice on my terms. The days leading up to the reunion passed in a fog of preparation. Every spare second went into organizing my evidence, scanned contracts with her forged signature, transaction records, statements from bank employees who unknowingly confirmed her identity. It all added up. A perfect, undeniable narrative. Mia never left my side. Her determination was the thread that kept me from unraveling. "You've got this, Emma," she said the night before, as I carefully tucked the documents into a crisp, labeled folder. "Just follow the plan. Stick to what you know. Don't let her spin it into something it's not." My hands trembled as I zipped the folder shut. She's been playing everyone for so long, Mia. What if they still don't believe me? What if Dad defends her again? Mia reached out, squeezing my shoulder. "This time, you're not just speaking your truth, you're proving it. They can't deny what's right in front of them. You've done everything you possibly could. Now let the facts speak for themselves." Her words stayed with me long after the lights went out. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, a quiet resolve settled over me. Tomorrow, everything would change. One way or another. The tension in the room snapped like a live wire. Gasps spread through the crowd like a wave as I held up the document for all to see. The signature, bold and unfamiliar, screamed forgery to anyone who knew my handwriting. But what truly shattered the silence was the photo, Eliza's face staring back at them from an ID with my name printed beneath it. "She used my identity," I said, my voice cutting through the whispers. "She pretended to be me, took out loans in my name, and let me take the fall for it. While I was losing my job, my apartment, and every ounce of credibility I had, she was flaunting designer bags and expensive jewelry." I turned to the next page in the folder, showing timestamps and transaction records. These loan applications were filed during hours when I was clocked in at work miles away. Here's testimony from my boss and coworkers. And here, I pulled out the next sheet, a photo still from a bank's security footage, is a frame from a security camera at one of the loan offices. Again, Eliza. Wearing my name like a costume. The room had gone completely still. Even the cousins who had laughed with Eliza earlier now looked at her with confusion, some with open disgust. I turned to my father, his arms crossed, face stony. "Dad, you told me I disappointed you. You looked at me like I was a stranger, and you believed every word she told you, without even asking me." His expression didn't soften, but he didn't look away. I looked back at the crowd, at Eliza, whose smirk had now vanished entirely. "This isn't just about money. It's about trust. About betrayal. I didn't want to believe my own sister could do this to me. But she did." Eliza opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Her eyes darted toward the door, then toward our father, then back to me. "I don't expect an apology," I said, my tone calm but unyielding. "Not from her. Not even from those of you who turned your backs on me. I just wanted the truth to be seen. To be heard." I placed the folder down on the coffee table at the center of the room. "Everything's here. If you care enough to know what really happened, you'll read it." I didn't wait for permission. I turned, heart still hammering, and walked toward the front door. No one stopped me. No one whispered this time. They just watched. Just as I reached the door, I heard a voice behind me, quiet, strained. It was my father. "Emma, wait." I paused. I didn't turn around. "I didn't know," he said, the words stiff and heavy with something that might have been regret. "I should have asked." I turned back, locking eyes with him. "Yes. You should have." Then I left. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't running away, I was walking toward something better. Toward freedom. Toward truth. Toward the life Eliza had tried to steal, and the one I was taking back. I raised my hand and pointed straight at Eliza. A collective gasp rippled through the room like a wave, and for the briefest moment, her polished composure cracked. She quickly forced a laugh, trying to mask the flicker of fear in her eyes. "That's absurd," she scoffed, her voice sharp and breathless. "Why would I ever do something like that, Emma? You're reaching. This is desperation at its finest." But I didn't stop. One by one, I laid out the pieces. The handwriting that didn't match mine. The loan applications filed in cities she'd conveniently visited. The employee descriptions that bore a closer resemblance to her than to me. With every detail, the room shifted, eyes slowly turning toward Eliza, the expressions around me morphing from judgment to disbelief, and then to suspicion. By the time I finished, the room felt electrified. A heavy silence lingered as I turned to my father. His face was pale, his eyes flicking back and forth between me and Eliza, searching for some version of this reality that didn't shatter his trust. "Dad," I said gently, my voice trembling, "I know this is hard to believe. I didn't want it to be true either. But everything points to her. She used my identity, my name, to finance her life. And I'm the one who's been left to clean it up." Eliza took a step forward, her voice high and cracking. "This is insane. She's trying to make me the villain because she's always been jealous, you all know that. She's twisted everything, and you're all just letting her." But the evidence I'd laid bare spoke louder than her frantic denials. For the first time, I saw the shift in the room. The once doubtful stares now held uncertainty, even regret. People who had judged me without question were now looking at Eliza with narrowed eyes and furrowed brows. The room fell into a stunned hush. Eliza's expression twisted, her lips trembling as the tension built. "This is a joke," she snapped. "I don't need to stand here and listen to these lies." She shoved past the crowd, her heels pounding the floor as she made a beeline for the door. "You're all pathetic for believing her," she hissed, her voice trailing behind her before the door slammed shut, leaving silence in her wake. And then, slowly, the murmurs returned. Soft voices, hesitant apologies, guilt woven into every word. "I'm so sorry, Emma," a cousin said gently, tears glistening in her eyes. "We didn't know. We should have listened. But I couldn't stay there, not yet." My heart was pounding as I pushed through the room and made for the exit. I needed to find her. I needed answers, alone. "Emma, wait," my father's voice called behind me. I paused for only a second, then kept going, footsteps echoing in the quiet as I burst into the cool night air. The parking lot was dimly lit, shadows stretching beneath flickering lights. There she was. Eliza stood by her car, her hands trembling as she fumbled with her keys. When I called her name, she froze. Slowly, she turned to face me, her expression caught between panic and rage. My father arrived behind me, breathless, his eyes darting between us, between the daughter he had defended and the one he had doubted. The night held its breath. And so did I. "What the hell is going on here?" Dad's voice cut through the thick silence like a blade. I stepped forward, my gaze locked on Eliza, unwavering. "You're not walking away from this," I said, calm but resolute. "We're having this conversation. Now." Her eyes darted between me and Dad, panic flickering just beneath the surface. She crossed her arms and leaned against the car, trying to look composed, but she was unraveling. "Tell him," I said, my voice sharp but controlled. "Admit what you did, Eliza. Tell Dad the truth. Because if you don't, I will go to the police." Her jaw clenched, and for a second, I thought she might lash out, her pride battling with the rising fear behind her eyes. But the truth had already wrapped around her like chains, and she couldn't outrun it anymore. "Eliza," Dad said, his voice low, cracking with both fury and disbelief. "Is it true? Did you really do what Emma's saying?" She let out a bitter scoff, throwing her hands into the air in surrender. "Fine. Yes, okay? I did it. I took out the loans in her name. I didn't think it would go this far, I thought it'd just fade away, that no one would notice." Dad staggered back a step, his face going pale. "How could you?" he asked, almost in a whisper. "To your own sister?" Eliza snapped, her voice rising defensively. "I didn't think she'd make such a big deal out of it. I needed the money. And Emma? She's always been invisible. I figured she'd just take the fall and move on." I stared at her, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. "You didn't just inconvenience me, Eliza. You ruined my credit, my reputation, my life. And believe it or not, I was willing to give you a chance to fix it quietly. but that window's closing fast. If you don't clear the debt and fix this, I will take this public. All of it. She froze. My words hung in the air like a final verdict. For the first time, she didn't have a smug comeback or a clever excuse. Her arms dropped to her sides. Her shoulders sagged. Tears filled her eyes as her gaze dropped to the pavement. I'm sorry, she whispered, barely loud enough to hear. I didn't mean for it to spiral like this. I didn't think it through. Dad looked at her like he didn't recognize her anymore. You didn't think? You jeopardized your sister's future. You lied to us. To me. Eliza swiped at her tears, her voice trembling. I'll make it right. I swear. I'll pay it all back, I'll clear her name. I'll do whatever I have to do. I promise. I studied her closely. For once, her mask was gone. And behind it was guilt, raw, unpolished, real. You'd better mean it, I said quietly, my voice steady but cold. Because if you don't, I won't protect you next time. This is your last shot. She nodded, tears streaking down her cheeks. I do. I mean it, Emma. I'll fix this. I promise. And for the first time, I thought maybe, she actually meant it. In the weeks that followed, Eliza followed through. She contacted the banks, paid off the outstanding loans, and submitted the necessary documentation to clear my name. It wasn't instant, and it didn't magically undo the damage, but slowly, piece by piece, my identity was restored. The calls from creditors stopped. The red flags on my credit report were removed one by one. And while I couldn't erase the sleepless nights or the way people once looked at me, I could finally breathe again. Closure didn't come from vengeance, it came from holding her accountable, from forcing the truth into the open and refusing to back down. Eliza's betrayal left its mark, there was no denying that, but it also revealed something deeper within me. I found the courage to stand up, speak out, and take back control. My family began to look at me differently. Slowly, their perception shifted, not because of Eliza's downfall, but because I refused to let her version of the story define me anymore. They saw the truth, finally. And more importantly, they saw me. As for Eliza, the road to rebuilding any kind of trust would be long, and maybe impossible. But that wasn't my burden to carry. I wasn't living in her shadow anymore. I had stepped into my own light. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like mine to keep.